Blood trickled from my split lip, tasting cold and metallic, but my young daughter's terrified eyes at the doorway pierced my soul. The people who gave me life had just struck me demanding I shoulder a massive debt, expecting the same submission I gave for 30 years. They did not realize that letting them take refuge in my home was a death sentence for their fake lives. The door closed, and the perfect revenge began. Hello to our wonderful listeners, and thank you for tuning in to Haley Revenge Stories. Our channel has unfortunately been demonetized by YouTube, leaving us completely without a budget to operate. If you find yourself captivated by today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1. Your generous donation ensures our dedicated staff can pay their living expenses and keep writing the stories you love. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the video description or comments. My name is Kendall Scott. The sharp, agonizing crack of my father Richard's palm striking my cheek echoed violently against the high ceilings of my living room. Before I could even process the sting, my mother Margaret lunged forward, shoving me with all her weight. I lost my footing and crashed backward. My hip slammed brutally into the thick edge of the glass coffee table. The impact sent a shockwave of pain up my spine, and my vision blurred for a fleeting second. I collapsed onto the hardwood floor, coughing as the sharp metallic taste of blood pooled in the corner of my mouth. I fought to catch my breath, my hands scrambling for purchase, but then I froze. Standing in the doorway of the hall was my 7-year-old daughter, Chloe. Her tiny arms were wrapped fiercely around her stuffed bear, her knuckles turning bone white from the pressure. She was physically out of harm's way, but the absolute terror wide in her eyes was a psychological wound I knew would take years to heal. This nightmare exploded because I finally drew a line. For hours, Richard and Margaret had been screaming at me, demanding I empty my hard-earned retirement accounts and take out a second mortgage on this very house. The reason my older brother Wyatt, the golden child, had recklessly gambled borrowed money on a massive cryptocurrency scam, lost everything, and was now being hunted by furious creditors. My parents expected me to sacrifice my daughter's future to bail him out. When I adamantly refused, their pristine upper-class masks shattered into pieces. "You selfish, ungrateful wretch," Margaret spat, dragging 3 heavy designer suitcases past the front door and dropping them onto my rug. "The bank took our house this morning because of your stubbornness. We are out on the street, so we are moving in right now, and we are not leaving this house until you write that check to save your brother." My trembling fingers reached for my cell phone resting near the sofa leg, desperate to dial emergency services. Instantly, Richard stepped over me, bringing the heavy heel of his leather shoe down hard on my wrist, pinning my arm to the floor. "Do it!" Richard hissed, his face contorted in a vicious sneer. "Call the cops. Make a public spectacle. But the second those sirens wail, your mother and I will drive straight to Ethelgard Logistics. We will stand right in the middle of your corporate headquarters and scream to every executive and fellow project manager about what a psychotic, abusive daughter you are. We will destroy your career before lunchtime." He lifted his foot. I pulled my aching hand to my chest, breathing heavily. They stared down at me with supreme arrogance, completely convinced that my stunned silence was my usual pathetic surrender. I slowly wiped the blood off my lip with my thumb, pushed myself up from the floor, and ignored their triumphant glares. I walked straight to Chloe, scooping her trembling body into my arms and burying her face in my neck so she could no longer see them. "It is all right, my brave girl," I murmured, rubbing her back as I carried her toward her bedroom. At that exact moment, the blinding panic in my chest evaporated, replaced by an unnatural, freezing calm. I paused at the end of the hall, looking back at the 2 parasites standing in my home. "The guest room is the second door on the left," I said, my tone completely devoid of emotion. I walked into Chloe's room and shut the door, securing the lock. They thought they had backed me into a corner, but letting them stay was the first step in tearing their lives apart. The morning sun bled through the kitchen blinds at exactly 6:30, casting long, sharp shadows across the marble countertop. If you expected Richard and Margaret to show even a fraction of remorse for the violence of the previous night, you would be dead wrong. They sat at my dining table with the casual, arrogant entitlement of visiting royalty. My mother flipped through a glossy home decor magazine, while my father aggressively tapped the screen of his tablet, completely ignoring my presence until he needed something. "Kendall, pour the coffee," Richard ordered without bothering to glance up. "And make sure the toast is actually crisp this time. I hate soggy bread." I stood by the sink, gripping the edge of the counter so hard my fingernails dug painfully into my own palms. The sheer suffocating audacity of their behavior was a heavy physical weight in the room. They had entirely erased the memory of pinning me to the floor and drawing blood. To them, my forced submission was merely the natural order of the universe resetting itself. I poured their coffee, my face a carefully constructed blank mask of obedience. By 7:45, I was buckling Chloe into the back seat of my car. She was unusually quiet, her little hands nervously twisting the hem of her school uniform skirt. The trauma of witnessing her mother being struck was a heavy storm cloud hanging over her tiny shoulders. Before pulling out of the driveway, I turned around in the driver's seat and gently took her hands in mine. "Chloe, look at me," I said softly, forcing a warm, reassuring smile to my lips. "What happened yesterday was just a bad play. Grandma and Grandpa are acting out a silly, grumpy script, and Mommy has decided to play a secret game to make them leave for good. But it is our highly classified secret mission. You do not have to worry about them ever again. Do you understand?" Her eyes searched mine for a long moment before she gave a tiny, hesitant nod. "A secret mission," she whispered. "A very secret one." I promised, kissing her forehead. I would burn the entire world to ash before I let their toxic hatred taint her childhood. When I returned to the house after the school drop-off, my parents were out running errands, leaving their belongings unguarded. Instead of breaking down in tears or wallowing in self-pity, my mind shifted instantly into the cold, calculating gears of a project manager handling a critical security breach. The moment I stepped into my home office, I saw it. Sitting proudly on my mahogany desk was Richard's heavy-duty personal server tower, right next to a sleek biometric mini-safe. They had brought their entire digital life directly into my fortress. My eyes darted to the corner of the ceiling. A cheap, blinking infrared camera was newly mounted there, and another sat camouflaged on the bookshelf. They had actually installed surveillance in my own home to monitor my movements and ensure I was not contacting the authorities or hiding assets. It was an insulting amateur move. In my line of work at the logistics firm, predicting and neutralizing threats was exactly how I earned my living. I drove straight to a specialized electronics retailer located 3 towns over to completely avoid any paper trail. I purchased several high-capacity micro-storage drives and a set of professional-grade pinhole-hidden cameras. When I returned, I went to work. I did not smash their cheap cameras. Instead, I bypassed their local network, subtly looping the footage to broadcast an empty room during the specific hours I needed to work. Then I embedded my own microscopic lenses inside the smoke detectors and behind the ventilation grates. Now I was the one watching them. That evening, I set the next phase of the trap into motion. I found Richard lounging on my sofa, a large glass of my most expensive scotch in his hand. I lowered my shoulders, adopting the defeated, exhausted posture of a broken daughter. "I looked at the numbers," I said, keeping my voice small and hesitant. "I cannot access the house equity quickly, but I have a substantial stock portfolio. I will call my broker at 9 in the morning tomorrow to authorize the liquidation. It will take roughly 3 to 5 business days for the funds to clear the required holding periods." Richard swirled the amber liquid in his glass, a smug, victorious grin spreading across his face. "I knew you would finally see reason, Kendall. Family protects family. See that the transfer is done by Friday." He completely bought the performance. My promised financial sacrifice was the perfect bait, drastically lowering his guard and making him feel completely in control of the situation. But the real work began when the house plunged into absolute darkness. At exactly 2 in the morning, while my parents snored loudly in the guest bedroom, I slipped out from under my covers. I moved through the hallways like a ghost, carefully avoiding the second and fourth floorboards that I knew would creak. I entered the study, shutting the heavy oak door silently behind me. I knelt beside Richard's server. The machine was protected by standard commercial-grade encryption, a genuinely pathetic defense against someone who managed complex data security protocols for global supply chains. I plugged in a custom decryption drive I had configured earlier that afternoon. My fingers flew across the keyboard in the pitch-black room, illuminated only by the harsh blue glow of the monitor. Line by line, firewall by firewall, I began to systematically dismantle his digital locks. My heart hammered against my ribs, echoing loudly in my ears. Every rustle of the wind outside or shift of the house settling made my breath hitch, but I never stopped typing. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the soft hum of the server cooling fan. I was no longer just looking for a way to protect my child. I was meticulously, patiently digging their graves one decrypted file at a time. The progress bar on my decryption software crawled with agonizing slowness. 50%, 60%. The silence of the house felt heavy, pressing against my eardrums as the soft hum of the hard drive spun faster. At exactly 2 hours past midnight, a muted green checkmark flashed across the black screen. The firewall collapsed. I was in. I opened the master directory, expecting to find offshore bank accounts or hidden assets they were hoarding while playing the victims. What I found was infinitely worse. It was a sprawling, meticulously organized labyrinth of financial fraud. My eyes scanned through dozens of spreadsheets, and a cold dread settled deep in my stomach. Years ago, Richard and Margaret had established a philanthropic organization in Fairfield County, ostensibly to help underprivileged families. The local newspapers had even praised them for it. But the data on this server revealed the sickening truth. There were hundreds of fabricated profiles, fake names, fake addresses, and fake hardship stories. They had been funneling millions of dollars of charitable donations directly into their own private trusts through these ghost beneficiaries. The charity was nothing but a massive, sophisticated money laundering operation. My own parents were stealing from the poorest members of our community to fund their luxury vacations and designer wardrobes. My hands shook as I clicked into a subfolder labeled under a chaotic string of letters and numbers. A PDF. Document rendered on the screen, and the blood instantly drained from my face. I stopped breathing. It was a legally binding guarantor contract for a massive underground loan. The borrower was my brother Wyatt. The amount was staggering, borrowed from individuals you absolutely do not want to owe money to. But that was not what made me physically sick. At the bottom of the final page, right next to the notary stamp, was my signature. It was a flawless forgery. Every loop and slant of my handwriting had been perfectly replicated. They were never just planning to bleed my savings dry. This was their backup plan. If I refused to pay, or if the black market creditors came to collect Richard, and Margaret had legally positioned me as the primary guarantor, they had framed me to take the fall. They were fully prepared to let violent criminals hunt me down or let the federal government lock me in a prison cell, just to shield their precious golden boy. A violent shudder ripped through my body. The sheer magnitude of their betrayal was a physical blow. I needed this data. I needed every single kilobyte. I initiated a mass transfer to my encrypted microdrive. A progress bar appeared on the screen. Time remaining 3 minutes. 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Then my blood turned to ice. A sound pierced the absolute quiet of the house. It was the distinct heavy squeak of the guest bedroom door hinges opening down the hall. Footsteps. Slow shuffling footsteps moving directly toward the study. My heart slammed against my ribs like a trapped bird. The download was only at 62%. I could not cancel it. If I pulled the drive now, the data would corrupt, and the server's security logs would alert Richard to the breach the moment he logged in. "Where did I put those pills?" I heard my mother mutter under her breath. her voice raspy from sleep. The footsteps grew louder, heavier on the hardwood floor. She was coming to the study to find her prescription sleeping medication, 80%. The footsteps reached the threshold of the hallway. I had less than 10 seconds. I reached down, yanked the power cord to the primary monitor, plunging the room into immediate darkness, leaving only the server box running silently on the floor. I ripped the micro drive from the USB port, the exact millisecond the transfer confirmed completion at 100%, shoving the tiny device deep into the pocket of my pajama pants. The brass doorknob turned. The door swung open, and the harsh, blinding light from the hallway flooded the room. I threw my arms over the mahogany desk and buried my face in my sleeves, forcing my shoulders to shake violently. I let out a loud, pathetic, ragged sob. "Kendall!" Margaret's voice was sharp, laced with irritation rather than concern. "What on earth are you doing sitting in the dark at this hour?" I lifted my head, making sure my hair was messy, and my eyes were squeezed shut as if I were crying. "I cannot do this." I choked out my voice, trembling perfectly. "The stress from work. The logistics project is falling apart. I just came in here to find a pen and I just felt so overwhelmed. I cannot breathe." Margaret scoffed loudly, a sound of pure disgust. She walked past me, opening the top drawer of the filing cabinet to grab her orange pill bottle. "Always so dramatic," she sneered, rattling the bottle. "You are a grown woman. Stop crying like a weak child and get a grip on your life. Your brother has real problems and you are having a breakdown over shipping schedules. Unbelievable." She turned on her heel and marched out of the room, slamming the door behind her without a second glance. I stayed frozen in the dark for 5 full minutes, listening until her heavy snoring resumed through the walls. When I was absolutely certain she was asleep, I exhaled a breath I felt I had been holding for an eternity. The fake tears evaporated instantly, leaving behind a cold, lethal clarity. I plugged my micro drive into my own secure laptop. I worked with the precision of a surgeon. I encrypted the entire payload with military-grade software. Using a series of dark web proxies and anonymous routing protocols, I bypassed all standard communication channels. I did not send this to a local police precinct. They would be too slow. I sent the entire encrypted package directly to a highly secure digital Dropbox belonging to a specific Federal Bureau of Investigation agent I had researched months ago, a man who specialized exclusively in high-level economic crimes and corporate fraud. I organized everything on my end. The forged guarantor contracts, the fake charity profiles, the abusive blackmailing text messages they had sent me over the years. Every piece of their fake empire was neatly categorized, cross-referenced, and armed. It was a masterpiece of destruction. The bomb was built, the fuse was lit, and all I had to do now was wait for the explosion. 3 days later, the doorbell echoed loudly through the house. I opened the front door to find my older brother Wyatt standing on the porch. For a man supposedly on the run from violent black market creditors, he looked remarkably relaxed and entirely unbothered. He was wearing a custom-tailored Italian suit that easily cost over $4,000, paired with a diamond-studded watch that gleamed obscenely under the porch light. He strolled past me without a single word of greeting, bringing the overwhelming, suffocating scent of expensive designer cologne into my quiet foyer. Richard and Margaret practically threw a royal parade in the living room the exact moment he arrived. The prodigal son had returned. Wyatt loudly announced that his previous cryptocurrency disaster was just a minor temporary setback. He boasted endlessly about a brand new startup venture, an artificial intelligence platform that was guaranteed to generate tens of millions of dollars within the first 6 months. He spoke with the loud, unearned confidence of a man who had never faced a single severe consequence in his entire 35 years of existence. To celebrate this imaginary future wealth, my mother marched directly into my private dining area and raided my wine rack. Without asking for permission, she selected a bottle of vintage French red wine, one that I had received as a rare corporate gift for successfully closing a multi-million-dollar logistics contract. It was a bottle meant for a truly significant life milestone. Margaret popped the cork with a loud, festive cheer, pouring generous crystal glasses for herself, my father, and Wyatt. They did not even bother offering me a single drop. Not that I would have accepted anything from their hands. I sat quietly in the far corner of the dark velvet sofa, holding a simple glass of cold filtered water. I watched them over the rim of my glass. The scene unfolding before me was a masterpiece of grotesque entitlement. "To Wyatt," Richard boomed, raising his glass high into the air. "A true visionary. The rest of the world just takes a little time to catch up to genuine genius." Wyatt chuckled smugly, taking a large, messy gulp of the stolen wine. He then turned his arrogant gaze toward me. "And let us raise a glass to my little sister, good old reliable Kendall, always so perfectly predictable." Margaret laughed loudly, a sharp grating sound that made my skin crawl. "Exactly right. Someone in this family has to be the boring workhorse. We are the creators, the risk-takers. Kendall was simply born to be our safety net. That is her sole purpose in life. Every great family needs a solid foundation to stand on when things get a little shaky." They openly mocked my quiet, highly disciplined life. They ridiculed my intense dedication to my corporate job, calling me a soulless drone who lacked the bravery to dream big. They joked cruelly about my solitary lifestyle as a single mother, implying that my only real value in this world was my high credit score and my liquid savings account. They were drinking my wine, sitting comfortably inside my house, actively plotting to steal my life savings, and treating me like the pathetic punchline of a hilarious joke. I did not argue with them. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice in protest. I merely took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, a faint, razor-thin half-smile playing at the corners of my mouth. They mistook my absolute silence for total submission, completely unaware that I was observing them with the detached, clinical curiosity of a scientist watching a group of doomed insects crawling blindly toward an open fire. Richard finally set his empty glass heavily on the coffee table and pulled a thick manila folder from his leather briefcase. He slid a neatly printed legal contract across the glass surface toward me, tapping the signature line impatiently with his heavy gold-plated pen. "The bank guarantee document," Richard stated, his tone shifting instantly from festive celebration to cold command. "I need your signature right here on the bottom line. The broker said your stock liquidation clears by tomorrow afternoon, so this document will secure the massive bridge loan for Wyatt's new company until your cash is fully transferred into our accounts." I leaned forward, picked up the gold pen, and signed my full name with smooth, flawlessly practiced strokes. I did not hesitate for a single second. I did not ask to read the fine print. "Good girl," Richard sneered, snatching the paper back aggressively as if I might suddenly change my mind. He practically vibrated with the intoxicating thrill of absolute power and dominance. What Richard did not know was that the document he just enthusiastically reclaimed was not the standard bank guarantee he had originally printed out. While he was snoring loudly the previous night, I had carefully removed his original contract from his briefcase and replaced it with a visually identical forgery of my own making. The document I just signed contained a deeply embedded, highly complex legal poison pill. It was a binding addendum that explicitly tied the financial liability of this specific loan directly to the fraudulent charity foundation they operated in Fairfield County. Furthermore, it contained a hidden clause that instantly nullified my guarantor status, the exact moment any federal criminal investigation was launched against the primary borrowers. I had not just refused to bail them out. I had legally handcuffed their massive new debt directly to their hidden illegal money laundering operation. The three of them erupted into another round of loud, triumphant laughter, toasting once again to their supreme victory over me. They were completely intoxicated by their own wild delusions of grandeur. They felt utterly invincible. They believed they were the untouchable apex predators of our family hierarchy, completely blind to the fatal reality of their situation. As they gleefully discussed which luxury sports cars Wyatt would buy with the new funds, they had absolutely no idea that 200 miles away, Inside a secure federal building, a stern-faced federal judge was currently slamming a wooden gavel down on his desk. They did not know that a massive team of federal agents was already reviewing my encrypted data drop, analyzing every single piece of their stolen wealth. They were blissfully unaware that sweeping search warrants and federal subpoenas had just been officially signed, sealed, and prepared for immediate execution. The storm was no longer gathering on the horizon. It was already here, and they were standing right in the center of the strike zone, holding up giant metal lightning rods to the sky. Exactly 1 week later, the grand ballroom of the opulent Sapphire Estate restaurant was bathed in the warm golden glow of 3 massive crystal chandeliers. It was the most exclusive and expensive venue in the entire county, secured by my parents to host their highly publicized annual charity fundraising gala. Outside valets rushed to park lines of luxury vehicles, from sleek sports cars to massive executive sport utility vehicles. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roasted truffles, expensive champagne, and the suffocating perfume of the local elite. Waiters in crisp white uniforms circulated with silver trays of caviar and imported delicacies. I stepped out of my hired town car at exactly 8 o'clock in the evening. For the first time in my life, I was not dressed in my usual sensible corporate attire. I wore a stunning floor-length emerald silk gown that commanded attention with every step. My posture was perfectly straight, my shoulders pulled back, and my expression was one of absolute, untouchable confidence. I had left my daughter Chloe safely locked inside my home, guarded by a highly trusted, off-duty police officer I had hired specifically for the night as a private babysitter. She was safe miles away from the blast zone. Tonight I was not a victim, and I was not a safety net. I was the executioner. I slipped through the heavy mahogany doors and took my place near the back of the massive hall, blending into the shadows near a towering floral arrangement. The room was packed with over 200 of the wealthiest investors, politicians, and business leaders in the state. At the very front of the room, standing proudly behind a towering acrylic podium, was Richard. He was wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo, his face glowing under the bright stage lights as he addressed the wealthy crowd. Behind him, a massive wall-to-wall digital screen displayed the beautifully designed logo of their fake philanthropic foundation. Margaret was sitting at the very important person table in the front row, beaming with a sickeningly sweet, fabricated smile as she nodded along to every word her husband spoke. She wore a heavy diamond necklace paid for by stolen funds. Wyatt was lounging in his chair next to her, already half drunk, casually swiping through his phone while waiting for the donation checks to start pouring in. "We are gathered here tonight because we share a profound moral obligation to lift up those who cannot lift themselves," Richard boomed into the microphone, his voice dripping with dramatic fake sincerity. "For 10 years, our foundation has been the shining beacon of hope for the forgotten families of this great county. With your generous contributions tonight, we will expand our reach. We will build new community centers. We will provide thousands of hot meals to starving children. Because true wealth is not measured by the numbers in our bank accounts, but by the boundless depth of our humanity and the love we share for our community." Thunderous applause erupted across the ballroom. Rich men in tailored suits and women in heavy diamond necklaces clapped wildly, deeply moved by the masterful performance. I raised my hand and tapped my smartwatch twice. It was the signal. I had granted the federal agents temporary remote access to the venue's master audiovisual control board. Right in the middle of the standing ovation, the massive digital screen behind Richard violently glitched. The beautiful charity logo fractured into a storm of static pixels. A loud, piercing burst of electronic feedback shrieked through the towering surround sound speakers, making half the audience violently cover their ears. The applause died instantly, replaced by a sudden, confused silence. Then the static cleared. The screen did not show pictures of smiling, underprivileged children. Instead, it broadcasted a massive high-definition spreadsheet. The header text was bold and glaring in bright red font, classified Federal Bureau of Investigation evidence file. Below it, thousands of rows of data began scrolling automatically in real time. It displayed every single fake beneficiary profile they had ever created. Next to the fake names were the exact routing numbers and private offshore accounts where the charity money had been secretly deposited. But the agents did not stop there. The screen flashed again, this time displaying scanned copies of Margaret's receipts for luxury handbags, and Richard's yacht maintenance fees directly cross-referenced with the exact dates of the charity withdrawals. Finally, the screen switched to a terrifyingly clear audio transcript. The speakers projected Richard's own voice recorded secretly during a phone call 2 years ago, echoing loudly across the silent hall. Just transfer the remaining $400,000 from the Children's Education Fund directly into my personal holding account in the Cayman Islands. These idiot donors will never check the audit trail anyway. They just want the tax write-off. The entire ballroom froze in collective horrifying realization. The silence shattered into 1,000 pieces. Absolute chaos erupted. The elite donors, realizing they had just been publicly exposed as victims of a massive fraud, began shouting in fury. Chairs were knocked backward as furious investors stormed toward the stage. Margaret's fabricated smile morphed into a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. She scrambled up from her chair, her expensive high heels slipping on the polished marble floor. She lunged frantically toward the control booth at the side of the stage, desperately clawing at the thick black audio cables, trying to yank them from the wall to stop the recording. But she never made it. A wall of furious, screaming benefactors surrounded her, blocking her path, and aggressively demanding answers about their stolen millions. On the other side of the room, Wyatt finally looked up from his phone, the color draining entirely from his arrogant face. He realized exactly what was happening. Panic seized him. He dropped his expensive crystal wine glass, which shattered loudly on the floor, and sprinted blindly toward the swinging silver doors of the catering kitchen to make his escape. He barely pushed the first door open when 3 men dressed in sharp, dark business suits suddenly materialized from the kitchen corridor. They were not waiters. They were plainclothes federal agents. The lead agent moved with terrifying speed. Grabbing Wyatt by the lapels of his custom Italian suit and slamming him brutally against the stainless steel wall of the kitchen, Wyatt let out a pathetic, high-pitched yelp of pain. In less than 3 seconds, the agent kicked Wyatt's legs apart, twisted his arms violently behind his back, and locked a pair of heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists with a sharp, echoing click. "Wyatt Scott, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud and grand larceny." The agent barked, his voice cutting clearly through the noise. The crowd parted as heavily armed, uniformed police officers stormed through the main entrance, securing all exits. I stepped out from the shadows of the floral arrangement. I walked slowly, deliberately down the center aisle of the chaotic ballroom. The furious donors stepped aside for me, sensing the terrifying aura of absolute control radiating from my every step. I walked up the short stairs to the stage. Richard was standing frozen behind the podium, sweating profusely, his chest heaving in panic as he watched his entire empire burn to the ground in a matter of seconds. He turned his head and locked eyes with me. For the very first time in my entire life, I saw genuine paralyzing fear in my father's eyes. He finally understood. He looked at the emerald dress, my confident posture, and the cold, dead calm in my expression. Richard choked out, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the word. "You did this to us." I stepped within inches of his face. I did not yell. I did not strike him. I simply looked down at him with absolute freezing contempt. I leaned in close to his ear, ensuring my voice was steady, sharp, and loud enough for only him to hear above the sirens now wailing outside the building. "Someone in this family has to be the boring workhorse," I whispered, throwing the exact words they used to mock me right back into his face. "I am just the solid foundation you needed to stand on, and I just decided to move." The realization of his total, irreversible destruction snapped the final fragile thread of Richard's sanity. His face contorted into a hideous mask of pure, unhinged rage. He did not scream or shout. Instead, he let out a guttural, animalistic snarl, and lunged forward across the stage, throwing his entire body weight directly at me. His large, heavy hands closed violently around my throat. The sheer force of the impact knocked me backward, but I refused to fall. I stood my ground, my feet planted firmly on the wooden stage, staring directly and fearlessly into his manic eyes as his grip tightened, cutting off my air supply. He was so completely blinded by his fury that he forgot exactly where he was standing. He forgot about the massive audience of wealthy elites. He forgot about the plainclothes federal agents already in the room. Most importantly, he forgot about the cameras. Dozens of smartphones were already raised high in the air by the frantic, panicked donors, their camera flashes illuminating the ballroom like a terrifying lightning storm. Every single agonizing second of his unprovoked, brutal assault on his own daughter was being captured in crystal-clear high definition from over 20 different angles. It was the absolute, undeniable proof of physical abuse I had waited for. He managed to hold my throat for exactly 4 seconds before the authorities swarmed him. 2 heavily armored, uniformed police officers charged up the stage stairs, slamming their shoulders directly into Richard's ribs. They tackled him violently to the polished floorboards. The heavy, sickening thud of his skull hitting the stage echoed loudly through the live microphone still standing at the podium. They pinned him down with overwhelming force, violently twisting his arms behind his back. Down on the floor near the front row tables, Margaret was already in handcuffs. She was weeping hysterically, her makeup running down her face in dark streaks as a stern female agent forcefully read her the Miranda rights. Wyatt was being dragged out of the kitchen doors, his expensive suit torn, kicking and screaming like a spoiled toddler throwing a tantrum. "Richard Scott, you are under arrest," the lead federal agent barked, his knee pressed firmly into the back of my father's neck as the heavy steel handcuffs clicked shut. "You are being charged with grand larceny, federal wire fraud, the forgery of federal documents, and aggravated assault." The legal aftermath that followed over the next several months was swift, surgical, and absolutely merciless. The federal government immediately seized every single asset my family claimed to own. Their hidden offshore bank accounts were permanently frozen, their luxury vehicles were impounded, and their names were plastered across every major news network in the entire country as the despicable architects of a multi-million-dollar charity scam. With the overwhelming, undeniable video evidence of his public assault on me, combined with the massive mountain of encrypted, irrefutable financial data I had handed to the investigators, the federal judge showed them absolutely no mercy. The climax of their destruction was absolute. My parents and my brother were all sentenced to serve several decades in federal prison. There would be no early parole. There would be no secret bailouts. Their toxic, parasitic lives were completely and irreversibly destroyed at the very root. On the night of the gala, I did not stay in the ballroom to watch the police drag my father into the back of the squad car. I turned my back on the flashing red and blue lights, walked past the chaotic crowd of reporters gathering outside, and stepped out the front doors of the Sapphire Estate. I stood alone on the quiet sidewalk, closed my eyes, and took a long, deep breath of the crisp, freezing night air. The suffocating heavy weight that had crushed my chest and dictated my every move for 30 years was finally completely gone. First thing the next morning, my lawyer formally filed the paperwork to secure a permanent lifetime restraining order against all 3 of them, ensuring they could never legally come within 100 yards of me or my child ever again. But my true cleansing began that very night. I drove my car straight back to my house. The moment I pulled into the driveway, I called a 24-hour emergency locksmith, paying him double his usual rate to immediately replace every single deadbolt, padlock, and handle on my exterior doors. Once the house was physically secured, I marched straight into the guest bedroom. I grabbed their expensive designer suitcases, the clothes they had scattered across my floor, and every single miserable item they had brought into my sanctuary. I dragged all of it down the hallway out the front door and hurled it aggressively into the heavy garbage bins sitting by the curb. They belonged exactly where I put them out in the trash. The story truly ends the following morning. The sun rose, casting a warm, brilliant golden light through my kitchen windows. The house was no longer a tense, silent war zone. It was incredibly quiet, peaceful, and profoundly safe. I stood at the stove flipping homemade pancakes when I felt two small, warm arms wrapped tightly around my waist. I turned around and knelt down on the hardwood floor, pulling my beautiful daughter Chloe into a fierce, protective embrace. She looked up at me, her bright eyes shining and completely free of the terrible fear that had haunted them just a week ago. We sat together at the dining room table, eating our breakfast covered in sweet syrup, and for the very first time in my entire life, my home was filled with nothing but the beautiful echoing sound of genuine laughter. The toxic ghosts were banished forever, and our real beautiful life together had finally begun. Thank you so much to all of our amazing listeners for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. Where in the world are you listening to this story from right now? Please let us know in the comments section below. If you found today's story empowering, entertaining, and satisfying, please consider supporting our channel with a small donation of just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code currently displayed on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Your generous support is the absolute only way we can pay our hardworking staff, helping them afford to feed their families and allowing us to continue creating these incredible stories to serve you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your kindness, and please have a wonderful, safe day.